In a minute, we're going to be talking to Chay Bowes generally, but the big thing we'll be talking to him about is the story of Leo Varadkar's leaking of a confidential document. And I'll just go through a little bit of background as to how that arose before we speak to Chay. So Paddy Cosgrave, who is the chief executive of the Web Summit, is an old friend of mine. And in the year 2020, he came to me with information from a few whistleblowers about alleged practice during COVID in hospitals in various places. And those informants didn't really go anywhere. We couldn't publish stuff from them. But he then introduced me to Chay Bowes, who will explain his own background. But Chay had received texts from Matthew O'Toole, who is a doctor who was head of a general practitioners trade union or union called the NAGP. That was a doctors' representative organisation that wasn't particularly well got with government. And those texts were sort of hot. They included, amongst other things, laddish, sexist and racist comments from Matthew O'Toole. But they also, more significantly, included Matthew O'Toole boasting that Leo Varadkar, as Taoiseach, had leaked a confidential draft terms of agreement of a contract between the government and a union that was a rival to the NAGP. That was the IMO, that Varadkar had leaked that document to O'Toole, and that seemed to me to be very serious. So we printed a very long and intricate article, peppered with screen grabs, which is characteristic. There was a lot of visual element, printing at length the actual WhatsApp communications, and it showed a sort of a boasty and offensive communications via WhatsApp. We published the article headlined on the cover, Leo Lawbreaker, and I think the article was headlined "Leo Always Delivers," which was one of the allegations that Matthew O'Toole had sent by way of WhatsApp to Chay Bowes. So the story was fed by Chay Bowes, and it was graphically illustrated by WhatsApp exchanges, and it showed that, amongst other things, that Matthew O'Toole's colleagues in his union were delirious to receive this hot document that gave them sort of an advantage that they wouldn't otherwise have had vis-a-vis their rival union. And then they also seemed to show that O'Toole was a buddy or a mate of Varadkar, although Varadkar was later at pains to downplay the friendship, and he described it as the sort of friendship where they met 2 or 3 times a year. So this was a quantitative description of something, which then gave us the opportunity to try and disprove it. So we managed to adduce evidence, mostly through other WhatsApp exchanges and also from the public record, that showed that actually the relationship must have been closer than that, because we could show that they'd met actually 6 or 7 times in the year that he had chosen to say that it was more like 2 or 3 times, suggesting that the relationship, the friendship, was just closer than had been stated, including on the Dáil record. So I suppose we were then determined to show 2 things. First of all, that there had been law breaking, and secondly, that Varadkar had lied about the relationship with his mate O'Toole, which is a resigning offence. To lie to the Dáil is a resigning offence. But I suppose from my point of view, I have an unused degree in law, and I was always very concerned, in particular, to frame the whole thing as law breaking. And in particular, we made the case in the article that there was a breach of the Official Secrets Act because the information was confidential. The document was marked very clearly confidential. But we also made the case that it was a breach of the Criminal Justice Corruption Act 2018 because it conferred illicit benefits on both Varadkar and O'Toole, whose colleagues in the union were so pleased to get this document that they had no right to. So anyway, all hell broke loose when we published this story with the incendiary headline. And Varadkar issued a detailed, but I thought somewhat ridiculous rebuttal full of mistaken views of the law. He probably shouldn't have done that. As part of that process, he admitted the facts and he apologised for errors of judgment, but he also advised that the piece he stated in the Dáil that the piece was grossly defamatory of him. He also was sort of unpleasant. He decided he was going to have a go at Village, and under a Dáil privilege, he said that Village was a fringe publication, and also that Village he was advised that suing Village would be like suing Twitter. He implied that it was a publication of straw, which is a bit unfair because we've taken care to, we're not offshore, and I'm liable as editor for anything that we say. He also, which I think was scandalous and wasn't adequately picked up by the media and was sort of menacing, he said that we were unregulated well, I don't know what he envisaged its appropriate regulation for media should be, but we're subject, like all media, to the laws of defamation. We're subscribers to the Press Council, so it's just was a bit off colour. But anyway, another phenomenon was that the main media were reluctant to print the story. They said they were worried that it was defamatory. The Irish Times claimed that there was a protocol that prohibited them from publishing screen grabs, which seemed unlikely, because in the end they actually sort of, in subsequent months anyway, they seemed to relish actually publishing screen grabs. So we couldn't really understand why the Irish Times and RTE were very loath to publish the details of the story, but they were, and they remain recalcitrant and slow, and they've never tried to interview either me or Chay Bowes about it. Anyway, the logic of this was that in the days subsequent to the publication of the article, that if it was criminal, that a complaint should be made to the guards. Chay and I contacted the guards and initiated a complaint. And I know the guards have interviewed Chay a couple of times, and Paddy. They interviewed me three times. I think the last time was in January. Anyway, there was a lot of controversy about it. It was a difficult thing, I'm sure, for Leo Varadkar to deal with this thing hanging over him for a prolonged guard investigation that I think lasted nearly 18 months. But in the end, in the last few weeks, we're told that a file of several hundred pages, which indicates that obviously the matter is very complex legally, which is something that we know anyway, has gone to the DPP. There are various views as to how long the DPP will take to deal with that, and obviously it's difficult for Varadkar because he's due to become Taoiseach in December under the coalition agreement. So I'm sure we all hope that the DPP resolves the matter quickly, but it is a complex file, and it's going to be difficult to get it done in the time, bearing in mind how complex the file is. I know how complex the file is, and obviously the guards took a long time because of its complexity. Meanwhile, the popularity of Fine Gael seems to have dived. And perturbing from our point of view, when it's impossible for us to get into particularly into the broadcast media, is that Leo Varadkar is constantly slagging us off, and particularly he specialises in saying that the complaint that we lodged was politically motivated, and he implies that some of us are associated with, I suppose, with Sinn Féin, with another political party, which certainly isn't true in my case anyway. So, well, I mean, in terms of the politics of it, the magazine is a leftist magazine, and Varadkar has put his head over the parapet and made it clear that he is not on the left. He's done some campaigns as a minister that were unsavoury on issues like social welfare, and from my own point of view, I'd be very concerned about his attitude to the environment. He seems to be a big stick in the mud of the green agenda. He's very effective. He's a very good communicator. He's a talented politician, and he seems to be effective at blocking a lot of the things that maybe the Greens, if they were more efficacious, might be able to push through. But the article, or the complaint, was just the logical upshot of the article, which was grounded in the facts and in wrongdoing which has been conceded. So I suppose it's a bit strange that the article appeared that way. Ideally, maybe a whistleblower like Chay Bowes, he doesn't like the term whistleblower, but ideally there maybe should have been some sort of a national organisation specialising in whistleblowing or in corruption, to which he could have made the allegation rather than going through Village. But anyway, that's a role that we seem to have had thrust on us. And in a minute, we're going to be talking to Chay Bowes, who is the man without which the allegation could never have been put into the public domain and the complaint made. So thanks very much for coming in, Chay. I'm just going to ask you general questions, because I think people haven't really had an opportunity to hear what you have to say, or what I have to say. But so just to tell us a little bit about your background, I suppose, your family and professional background.
Okay, well, I mean, I'm married. I've been married twice, actually, so I'm on my second blissfully happy marriage. And we've young children. I have children from my first marriage.
How many kids do you have?
I have 4 young children and 4 old ones. So I have 4 adults as 4 babies. But that's how I like to manage just mentally. Otherwise, it sounds like I have 8 children. As I said, some maniac. But well, probably am a maniac. We were all born in England, and we returned to Ireland. My dad wanted to come back to Ireland. I think he wanted to get a job back here in Dublin Gas Company. So he came back, took the opportunity, and we all came home.
Sometimes it's a bit difficult to understand you because of your strong English accent.
Yeah. And I have I suppose I did a DNA test recently, to check was I English, but I have absolutely no English DNA. Apparently I'm 93%, Gaelic Irish.
Did you when you left school?
Initially, I was in the Army Medical Corps for a while and working in that sort of paramedical space for.
So you went into the entrepreneurial side of it then?
Yeah, I suppose I think around 2000, I kind of realized that the whole health system was just impossibly screwed. Seeing so much dysfunction in it, so much misery, so much money being spent, that I just thought I'd try something new myself. I think in 2004, I had the first of them. And so it went from a very small company with good ideas to a very big business within about 3 or 4 years, really.
And you were working for the VHI at one stage?
Yeah, well, when my first encounter with the H and HSE logic was when we got this contract to treat patients in the community for a very common but very sort of recidivist illnesses like respiratory disease that take up huge amounts of space in hospitals, cost a fortune. And I came up with an idea with them. We could transplant the care that they get in hospital on these almost routine visits into the community, build a system of healthcare. We called it Hospital at Home with a company called Tara Healthcare. We took a big centre in the Beacon Hospital. It's just been built and it was changing hands. So we got a big space in there. We had, I think, over 150 nurses at the top of it, probably about 15, 16 full-time doctors, medical director, consultants, Jerry, myself. So it was a big business. And we were saving the state huge amounts of money by keeping these people out of hospital, of course. But, this was about 2008 and we were asked to come in by the HC and they said, look, we're going to have to shut the whole thing down. So, it ended up that they actually ended up paying us a huge penalty to shut the contract. But I've been negotiating with the VHI to take this model on as a way of reducing their spending on their insured patients, whereby if you get a patient at home with one of these illnesses, they get better quicker, it's cheaper, it's safer, so they wouldn't have to pay as much.
So what was your biggest frustration or the biggest lesson you learned from working in the system?
Well, I mean, the Irish health system is essentially this Jekyll and Hyde anomaly where you've got a very poorly managed public health system, and that the deficits of that public health system are used to sell private health insurance to basically 50% of the population, who spend about 2 billion euros a year for fear of the public system. I mean, if we had a public health system that actually worked and people thought, well, this is fantastic and be seen on time, we wouldn't need a private health system.
But you also had some concerns that ideas that should be pursued in the public sector are being somehow appropriated by the private sector.
I've come across that professionally. I mean, I suppose how my story would have come to public prominence would have been through my attempt to promote community-based hospital system with no hospital, because the hospitals are very expensive. They're basically Victorian constructs where you put all the sick people together in one place and you wait for them to get sicker. And that was proven in COVID, where we put a lot of vulnerable people together and they all contracted COVID. Then we dumped them into the community, then back into the hospital. So the ideology was very simply, you take the pertinent parts of that treatment and you bring them into the community. So essentially, they've been doing this in Australia and the United States for 40 years. Basically.
And what frustrations did you experience trying to pursue that?
Well, I mean, the motivations in the public system in Ireland are bizarre, and I've written about this elsewhere. And I think the analogy would be, the more dysfunctional the system is, the more it can justify the ridiculous spending. Because it's the management of dysfunction which takes precedence over ingenuity or solving problems. I mean, not too many people in the Irish health system actually want to solve them.
But you'd some specific, though.
Yeah, I mean, when we were running our own service, we were informed that, we were asked to present in the UK, France, people were looking at the sort of model we were doing because it was evidence-based. We were getting people better, more quickly, less, nosocomial infection or hospital-acquired infections because you don't catch them in your home. People were massively far better disposed to being treated at home. I mean, so it was working fantastically.
But you were lent on to bring in particular people into the.
Yeah. I mean, initially at the start of when we got the contract award, I was approached by an individual who was working in the HC at the time and advised that if we wanted to get the contract, we should work with a particular other company, which they had somebody very close to them working in. So I was approached on that from that was at a very early stage. And it was intimated to me that if we were to be successful, that would be a very wise move for us to make. So I ignored them, of course. I told them to fuck off. And I just went ahead anyway. But from a very early stage, you were influenced, and the backslapping and the sort of nods and the winks and the golf clubbing goes on.
And is it true to say that your frustration with that animated your instigating the story about the leaking of the contract? You were very frustrated with the...
I was frustrated, yeah. I mean, and the Community Hospital Ireland idea, which is still a living idea, and we're still talking to people about it, it's a not-for-profit ideology where, you know, it can make money, but the money gets plumbed back into local communities to prevent and educate about chronic diseases and stuff like that. So I was lucky enough that I had an income. I had done okay. You know, I was relatively secure, so I could... 5 years ago, decide I wanted to try and do something new. I knew the system. I knew a lot of people in the system. I knew a lot of politicians. And I was offered this role as the interim head of the second biggest medical union in the country, the NAGP, to assess what was happening in the union. And it turned out the union was totally defunct, but it was limping along with serious issues on governance and cash and various issues which are published. I think Susan Mitchell did a big story of that in the Sunday Business Post. So as part of that, I was still trying to promote this community hospital ideology where a not-for-profit, and I was told by, let's say, probably the most senior civil servants in the country in regard to health, that nobody would take enough of
some specific ones, yeah.
There were specific ones.
Some specific civil servants, you know.
Yeah.
Who you've named, I think.
Say again?
Who you have named.
Yeah. I mean, I'm working with people like Tony O'Brien in the HSE, and I was told very clearly, if you want to run this as a not-for-profit, no one's going to take it seriously, and no one's going to contract you with you. Because if it's not going to make money, and then on the periphery make money for others, we're just not interested in it. It's a great idea. I mean, Leo Varadkar wrote me a letter saying it's fantastic. You're working with Jim Breslin, Department of Health. The Jim is very good. I mean, the evidence base for this type of stuff, it works. But the problem is you have these huge infrastructural projects going on in the community which need to be funded. Okay, if something's operating dysfunctionally, you still need to fund that dysfunction, and it costs billions a year.
But moving from that to the so you met Matthew O'Toole. How did that then feed into the?
Well, Matthew was the president, the youngest ever president of the NAGP, and I approached Matthew with my idea about this community hospital idea, because community doctors are critical to that. Rather than sending an elderly patient into hospital, the model we were building was that you would be able to send the hospital into the patient's home to keep them in the community, to keep them well, preventative healthcare, lots of very common sense Scandinavian ideology. So I presented that to Matt. He thought it was a fantastic idea. He thought it could transform medicine in Ireland. They had around 2,000 GP members, and general practitioners are the gatekeepers of the health system. They refer the patients to the consultants. They sort of are the underappreciated sort of foot soldiers of the system. So I thought it was critical to get them involved rather than the consultants, which also didn't work to my advantage, because consultants are very powerful. The IMO would represent consultants, and the NAGP would represent the community doctors, the general practitioners. So I made the pitch to the guys. They thought it was great. I became friendly with Matt. He was a very bright, dynamic, attractive guy. He was young. He represented a sort of a freshness, I think, in how he was dealing with politicians. He could present well. And, I just thought this is a superb guy to sort of advocate for what we want. And we became friendly. He subsequently asked me to come into the union as the interim chief executive, because I ran, medical businesses, as we've discussed. And I started that by doing a report into the governance of the union. And I did that over a period of 3 weeks. And while that was going on, this document, which the union had been trying to procure, I'd imagine for long before I'd arrived. I mean, I'd only arrived maybe 2 weeks when it actually landed. So I was unaware of the value of the document, essentially, until later when I realized what we'd actually seen occur.
This is the heads of terms for the contract.
Yeah, the contract or the document, whatever that Leo Varadkar had covertly given him.
The draft of the head of terms for...
Yeah, just the background to it is there were huge cuts made to the funding of general practice in, I think, 2008, 2010. period. I stand to be corrected on that. The FEMPI, I think, financial cuts. So they were to be reversed as part of a deal to get doctors to be more productive, to do more with chronic disease, etc. So the only people that the state would negotiate with were the IMO, the Irish Medical Organization, who basically represented,
and the state was quite hostile to the NAGP.
The NAGP was seen as more radical, more militant, and in my view, quite rightly so. But the state obviously relished the idea that they'd have two.
But take us through then how you got these documents that finished up in the Village story about the leak.
Yeah, well, I mean, the documents were shared with me. I've heard all sorts of ridiculous things that I took the documents from people's phones that I had because I was the CEO. Bizarre reality to it. What happened was Matthew shared this with me. He had informed me he needed to get the document. That was very important. I wasn't focused on that. I didn't even really connect with it because I was focused on trying to assess and present the realities of where the union was. And it was a basket case. So I did present and suggest that it should be shut down immediately. That was in breach of company law. It was trading insolvent. It was in breach of numerous revenue laws and, it owed over a couple of $100,000 to the revenue alone, and it had done for a long time. It was trading out of a domestic house. It was a mess. So I presented that, and on the basis of my report, the union basically collapsed because I suggested to the committee of the union, which, among whom were the richest doctors in the country, some earning more than €1 million a year in general medical fees from the state, that if they wanted to contribute, and I would contribute alongside them to pay the bills, change the governance, but they refused to do that. And the next day after I presented my report, they reappointed the CEO I'd done the report on, bizarrely. So that's how, that I began to see, well, this thing doesn't want to get fixed. It doesn't need to get fixed. So there's obviously some sort of benefit.
You still have good relations with Matthew O'Toole at this stage. Why did you finish up leaking or sharing a trove of correspondence with him, with Village?
I think Matthew, I don't have any issue with Matthew. I think he's a good person. I think he was naive in how he dealt politically. I think he may have been manipulated somewhat by the older, wiser heads in the NAGP to get proximity and access to Leo Varadkar. And you can imagine if you're an old guy on a board of a big organization and you get this young dynamic guy, he's gay, he's modern, he's moving in the right circles. And Matthew O'Toole is very good friends, not particularly with Leo Varadkar, but he's very good friends with Leo Varadkar's partner, Matt Barrett. They're both Gael Gorey. They both grew up in the same part of the country. They're very friendly. They
worked
trained together in St. Vincent's Hospital. That's something that people don't really seem to connect with, is that this essentially is the equivalent of Boris Johnson giving his wife's best mate a contract which has a value of about €250 million. Covertly, the idea that it was done in some sort of move to reconcile general practice is ludicrous and embarrassingly poor, because the NAGP were almost dedicated to the destruction of the IMO.
So you were frustrated. You thought it was unethical.
I knew it was how business was done. And remember, when you're in a position like me to do something about this type of stuff, you have to have proximity to it. I mean, many would say, well, I was a crony as well. I mean, I was involved in business in Ireland for probably 30 years prior. And there was a lot of that inappropriate influencing done via politics, via sport, via intimation, via family, via the old school tie, via the Gar Club, the rugby club. It happens.
Isn't that the way?
It is happening. But this was a specific moment where I thought, look, I spent 3 years of my life. By the way, just on the NAGP, I did everything I did for the NAGP. I didn't charge them. I didn't invoice them. I never benefited remotely. I didn't bill them whatsoever. I was doing what I was doing with the union to try and assist Matt, who I'd become friendly with. And because I also thought that if we can rescue the union, we could then implement the community hospital ideology, which would be central to its existence. So, but I never billed or...
But you're essentially, I know you don't like the term whistleblower, but you were able to make such an impact because you were an insider. And people don't understand that in order to get people to expose wrongdoing in the system, you have to be indulgent of whistleblowers. Not all of them behave perfectly all of the time, but if they're whistleblowing, they should be given a pass. If they're whistleblowing about something that's an enormous amount more serious than anything that they've been involved with themselves.
I think it's important to say, though, I mean, my motivation was probably that I'd spent 3 years working at Community Hospital Ireland again, with no pay. I didn't pay myself when I established that company. I had done it in partnership. It accrued serious bills. You don't get legal advice and you don't do that stuff without paying your way. And I paid it all personally. So at the end of it, when I saw the culmination of the community hospital ideology with the NAGP, when the NAGP collapsed due to my report, the community hospital ideology very rapidly fell away. The phone stops ringing. When you stand up and you say, "Look, this is corrupt. This thing, it's probably been operated illegally."
And that was well before you.
There's an ODC Office Director of Corporate Enforcement investigation began into the operation,
which still hasn't reported it.
I think it hasn't reported. Yeah, I think that's something you'd have to check, but I don't think it still has. So that was the beginning of my sort of, if you like, movement towards saying, well, look, nothing was going to happen in the medical system, which was a not-for-profit, which was going to be taken seriously by the state.
Okay, so I just wanted to direct towards your involvement in the Varadkar thing. So so you decided that you were going to expose this scandal. So what did you do? Paddy Cosgrave was a mutual contact for both of us. Yeah. Just take us through that.
Well, I was watching some of the stuff around COVID. COVID had happened, of course, and I was reflecting on what we'd done in community hospital. And I spent 3 years of my life promoting it, traveling the country again. And this was on a motivation for money. I've read all sorts of stuff online and on Twitter, people saying that I exposed Varadkar because I didn't get a big contract. I didn't want a big contract. It was a company limited by guarantee, which couldn't make money for me. Yeah. And I didn't take money, nor did I seek it. So people find that difficult in Ireland, of course, to comprehend that somebody might actually do something because they actually care about the health system and care about, accountability. But I mean, I was heading for 50, had, a fairly secure life. And I thought to myself, well, what am I going to do with the knowledge I know? I can just sit back and do a bit of consulting. I can, and I could have easily done that. And I was in the middle of doing a consulting project on a fairly big project in the west of Ireland, which immediately collapsed as soon as I came out and exposed what had happened. So I decided, look, I've probably got, another 20 good years in me. And the impact that the community hospital model would have been marginal compared to the impact we may be able to have if we start to expose and demand political accountability in Ireland. And you don't get much.
So that was the essential equation.
You don't get much bigger of an opportunity to expose cronyism and backslamping and influence peddling than when it's the actual Prime Minister has done it.
Okay, so take us through the process of what you did.
Well, what I did was, I was friendly with Paddy. We were discussing stuff on COVID and the serial mismanagement of procurement around COVID. There were some issues there. And Matthew and Paddy had a bit of a spat, I think, online. And through that, I began to think, Jesus, I'm going to go back through my stuff and see what do I know about this? What can we talk about? And, the document came up, the whole process, and the covert nature where Varadkar had handed it to Matthew, his own document, getting it sent by a courier out to the government jet. It just was like a bad Netflix movie.
So what did you do with it then?
Well, I sat with you, Michael, and we went through it. I told you what had happened. I suppose we worked on it probably.
As a partnership. It was a partnership.
Yeah. I mean, we were probably 3 months going through everything between the jigs and the reels, because when you're, despite, deciding that you're going to do this, there comes a moment, like a red button moment, where you've got to actually press the button and your life will change from the moment.
And that was very close. It was only very close to publication that we realised that the thing stacked up legally.
And then, of course, the whole issue that he may have broken the law, and initially was the Official Secrets Act, and then the Corruption Act. So it begins to very quickly gather pace from where the mainstream media totally ignored it. And you sit down with people, the head of news and RTE, show them that everything you've got, which you published, and you sit down with the senior reporters from the Irish Times and they ignore it. It compounded my view that this story had to be told. Okay,
so you've been frustrated. We've all been frustrated with the pickup of the story by the mainstream media, and that's been a big part of it.
Yeah, I think they have. I think they have now picked up the story, and it's probably one of the biggest. I've been told by senior editors in the big titles that it's probably the biggest political story of the last decade, at least. I think in any other European country, Mr. Varadkar would have at least resigned.
Does he not have the benefit of the presumption of innocence that he...
Well, he admitted in Dáil Éireann in our parliament that he did wrong, and that what he did was wrong. It was morally wrong and it was inappropriate.
But he certainly
Exact
didn't
words.
admit that he committed a crime.
He didn't. No, and I mean, it's not for me to suggest he's committed a crime. I think it's for me to present the evidence to the public, who are serially presented as idiots by the media and by politicians. I mean, remember, our mainstream media, we're a very small country. We're the size of a medium British city. And we have a media which essentially has given up on investigative journalism, actual journalism whatsoever, because it's a very dangerous place to be. And I've been told this by mainstream employees. I mean,
So what lesson did you learn from that then? Because you've been involved with a new online initiative, Ditch.
yeah, I mean, the lesson is quite simple. I mean, when I presented the information as presented to you, which has led to probably the longest running criminal investigation into a senior politician in the history of the state, that same evidence, which now has a file with the Director of Public Prosecutions, was essentially ignored by the Irish Times and by RTE. And,
But it's
the
still
initial excuse, we can't verify that these messages are real. So I met them, showed them the messages on my phone, rang the numbers, still nothing. We broke the story, and they were forced to
And
do
it was implied that it was obviously not criminal, which was put a lot of pressure on us as the principal informant.
Yeah, and it was also
And it's
implied
still-
that we were going to be sued, and this is
Yeah.
this, that Vrag would sue me and you, and triple us, that my businesses would be destroyed. There was threats and what have you. But
And it's still being implied that it's self-evident that the file will be rejected by the.
it was implied that
DPP.
Trump would lose the election. It was implied that Brexit would never happen. It was implied that Putin wouldn't invade Ukraine.
Okay, so the lesson for you was that you needed to be involved in forming your own new media outlet.
Yeah, you become very much. The world becomes a very small place when you do this type of stuff, because you don't imagine it's going to be as big as it is. That you're going to become sort of notoriety or infamy, whichever way your political persuasions would be. You're accused of being a political activist. I think Dracker said last week that I was a politically motivated liar, essentially, in California, which is patently untrue. I'm not in any political party. I have my own political views, of course, but I'm not in a political party. I spoke to all of the opposition parties and some of the government parties when this happened. They actually met with me.
But talk to me about the Ditch and setting up the Ditch.
Well, Ditch is a sort of an online platform. It's kind of a fresh kind of approach to investigative journalism, where we're looking at basically dysfunction in Irish politics.
And who's involved in it?
I'm not going to say who's involved in the writing end, because they've decided to maintain their anonymity so far. But I think, given the successes of the scalps that are being carved in, that might change soon.
I think I've reason to believe they're ready.
I'm a director of it, and there's two other directors, and Paddy Cosgrave is involved as well. Paddy is helping us out with his significant media knowledge.
Why did you not? What was wrong with Village?
Well, we called down to your place when you were asleep, probably drunk.
Okay, so tell us about your politics.
Well, I suppose I was thinking about this. I thought you might ask me that question, and as I was driving in, I was thinking it's almost so irrelevant what kind of political party is running a country. It's all about how they run the country. And so I suppose I'm a centrist in the view that I would just like things to work. I'd like political accountability. I've seen so much political dysfunction and lack of ownership.
Are you a nationalist?
I'm a very skeptical nationalist, in that I consider myself a patriot in the United Irishmen term of it. I think that was probably the single greatest political movement on our island was the United Irishmen, liberty in the French model of equality.
So in terms of political parties, for example, do you think of Sinn Féin? You're a big force on Twitter, nearly as big a force as Village now. What do you like? You seem to be quite well disposed towards Sinn Féin. Is that
I'm well disposed towards Sinn Féin because they're a competent, or have been a competent, at least, opposition.
You're a floating voter, essentially.
I will vote. I certainly would never vote Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael ever again. I think that would be preposterous. I don't think anybody could. I don't think anyone could vote for the Green Party after they licensed this unholy government into power. And have now.
So tell me, would you? I know it was mooted that you were going to stand in the by-election late last year.
Not by me.
Would you set up a political party?
No, I don't think it's something I'm interested in. Of course, you can't rule anything out. I would be interested in political life, but purely as a disruptor, purely as someone that would ask really awkward questions,
okay,
and not be in the golf club with the guys who I'm trying to.
So Mick and Clare, or Neil Richmond and David McManus.
I'm Mick and Clare, 100%.
Okay. So I'm going to ask now some personal questions. So how many pints do you drink a week?
Jesus. It depends if you're in town. If you're around, I'd probably go out twice a week for a few pints, but my wife would
And
argue that.
how many tweets do you publish weekly?
Probably 20, maybe, I don't know.
Okay. Are you good in the scrap?
I'm dangerously unconcerned about physical scrap.
Hopefully, like myself, retired.
Retired scrapper, yeah.
Okay. Where would you see yourself in 10 years?
Maybe in prison.
And tell me about do you have strong views on the environment?
Yeah, I do. I think
these are questions I'm going to ask everybody, actually.
Yeah, I think the problem with the environment in Ireland is that it becomes something central to a political ethos. It should be central to everybody's ethos in everything we do around our society. It shouldn't be, we're a Green Party. Everyone.
And is equality a big thing for you? And if so, equality of opportunity or equality of outcome?
I think it's equality of opportunity. You can't insist people take opportunity. You can only just eat appropriately for opportunity, I think.
Okay. Anything else?
Yeah, that's it.